At 9:12 a.m., I was the foster kid in their family photo. At 9:47, I owned their $2.8 billion empire. I walked into a will reading invisible and walked out with the family in ruins, but that's not the twist. The twist is what I did next. If anyone ever told you to stay quiet, pull up a chair. My name is Mackintosh, I'm 24 years old, and for 13 years, I was the foster kid who didn't belong. The girl at the end of the marble table who everyone forgot was listening. But here's the thing about being invisible, you see everything. You hear every whispered lie. Every family secret. Every cruel joke they think you're too unimportant to understand. When my foster father died, I expected nothing. I was prepared for nothing. I walked into that lawyer's office knowing I'd walk out with the same thing I'd always had, silence and shadows. Instead, I discovered the family fortune built on deception wasn't theirs at all. The Mackintosh empire. The crystal glasses, the marble floors, the billions in assets. All of it legally mine. The foster kid was the only real heir in the room. Picture their faces. Picture the moment when 13 years of treating me like something they'd scrape off their shoe suddenly changed in 35 minutes, and I now controlled their entire existence. But that fortune, that wasn't my revenge. That was just the beginning. Because I know what it's like to swallow your voice. To believe you're powerless while everyone around you plays games with your life. To think your story doesn't matter. That's why I created this space. Every episode, I will read their stories and tell you exactly how they turned their breaking point into their breakthrough. How they took their pain and forged it into power. Because karma doesn't just happen, sometimes you have to serve it yourself. Welcome to Karma Café, where we serve truth scalding hot and revenge ice cold.
Wait, before I tell you how I inherited a billion-dollar empire, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room full of people who thought you were nothing, while you were quietly becoming everything? If yes, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, and the word unstoppable, if you've ever been underestimated. Because what happens next? They never saw it coming.
The leather chair beneath me felt wrong. Too stiff. Too polished. The kind of chair meant not for comfort but for control. I sat at the long mahogany table surrounded by the Mackintoshes, a family I had lived with for 13 years but had never truly been part of. At the head of the table, Diana Mackintosh reigned like a monarch. Her black velvet dress shimmered under the recessed lights, her posture immaculate, her face a portrait of cold composure. Mourning had not softened her, if anything, grief had made her look sharper. On either side of her sat Alfred and Bella, the golden twins. Alfred scrolled through his phone with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his life. Bella examined her manicured nails, her indifference so rehearsed it might as well have been choreographed. And then there was me. Makosi Albany. The foster child. The charity case. The shadow they tolerated in public for the sake of optics, and ignored in private. I didn't know why I had been summoned here. I wasn't family. Not really. Maybe Donald had left me a token, a book from his library, a framed photo, something small to remember him by. That was all I dared expect. Mr. Harrison tapped the folder, shuffling the papers inside. Diana waved a diamond-studded hand. Get on with it, Harrison. I have a luncheon at 1, the Foster Children's Foundation, ironically enough. Her eyes flicked toward me, and her smile was all ice. Makosi understands the importance of these events. I said nothing. Silence had always been my safest answers. Mr. Harrison, the family's lawyer, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. Before we begin, I should inform you that Mr. Mackintosh left very specific instructions. His will was revised just 1 week before his passing. 1 week? Diana's voice cracked like a whip. That's impossible. I was with him every day in the hospital. Not every day, Harrison said, careful. There were private meetings. Her fingers stilled against the table. Even Diana, the master of control, couldn't hide the small twitch in her jaw, the way her eyes narrowed. Proceed, she commanded. Harrison opened a thick folder embossed with the Mackintosh coffee crest, the elegant cursive M that adorned 3,000 cafes across 15 countries. His voice carried the weight of ritual. To my wife, Diana Mackintosh, I leave the properties already in your name, the house in the Hamptons, the Paris apartment, and your jewelry collection, valued at approximately $8 million. Diana inclined her head as though receiving tribute. But I saw the flicker in her expression. 8 million. A fortune to most, but scraps to her. Diana had expected more, much more. Company shares, board seats, control, empire. Not just jewels and vacation homes. Harrison read on. To my son, Alfred, and my daughter, Bella, I leave your vehicles, personal belongings, and $1 million each. The twins froze. 1 million. Bella's voice pitched high, brittle with disbelief. Alfred dropped his phone onto the table with a clatter. That can't be it. Where are the company shares? The main estate. This is ridiculous. Diana's gaze flicked to them, torn between maternal instinct and rising panic. They had been raised as heirs. They were meant to inherit. Yet here, in black ink, their crowns were being taken away. And then Harrison spoke my name. To Makosi Albany. The words rang like a gunshot. I leave the remainder of my estate, including all shares of Mackintosh Coffee Corporation, the Manhattan Penthouse, the Westchester Estate, all investment portfolios, and associated assets, totaling approximately $2.8 billion. The room went still. 1 second, 2, 3. Then it exploded. Bella shot to her feet, her designer bag spilling lipstick and compacts across the Persian rug. She's not even family. She's the foster child. This is insane. Alfred's fury twisted his face, the golden boy mask fracturing. This is fraud. A mistake. She's nothing. She's nobody. Diana's mask cracked wide. The blood drained from her face, her hand curling into a fist against the mahogany table. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she looked powerless. This is absurd, she spat. He was delirious, manipulated. This will cannot stand. Mrs. Mackintosh, Harrison cut in, his voice hardening. 3 independent physicians confirmed Mr. Mackintosh's full competency. The will is valid. And I was present, as were 2 other partners from this firm. Diana opened her mouth but no sound came. Her silence was louder than denial. And, Harrison continued, lifting a remote, Mr. Mackintosh left a video message to be played at this moment. A soft whir filled the room as a screen descended from the ceiling. The lights dimmed. Donald Mackintosh appeared, gaunt in a hospital bed, his eyes still sharp as obsidian. Even weakened, even dying, he commanded the room. My breath caught. This man, who had barely spoken to me in 13 years, who had let me remain invisible in his home, was about to speak louder than he ever had in life. And before his voice filled the room, my thoughts unraveled. I had not expected this. Not any of it. For years I had lived in Washington, D.C., only returning to the penthouse during holidays when I was summoned. I rented a small apartment close to college where I could keep my Boston Terrier, Angus, the last gift my mother gave me before she died. College, then grad school. I had a business major with a minor in media and an MBA from Howard University. I had worked part-time at Mackintosh Coffee Cafes, writing papers that dissected its supply chains and expansion strategies. Every essay, every dissertation circled back to Mackintosh Coffee. I told myself it was academic interest, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted to belong. I remember the night everything clicked. I was 16, doing homework at the kitchen island while Diana hosted one of her dinner parties. The adults had moved to the living room, voices carrying through the open doorway, board members, investors, people whose names appeared on financial reports I glimpsed in Donald's study. The Portland expansion is hemorrhaging money, someone said. Mitchell Barnes, I think. 3 stores, all underperforming. Location, 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 Diana laughed, but there was an edge to it. Donald insists on these flagship addresses. All prestige, no foot traffic. I kept my head down, pencil moving across my calculus homework, but my ears were recording every word. The demographics are wrong, another voice chimed in. We're putting artisanal coffee shops in neighborhoods full of college students living on ramen budgets. Donald's voice, weaker than the others, brand positioning matters. We're not Starbucks. No, but Starbucks makes money, Barnes replied. Later that night, after the guests left and the house fell quiet, I pulled up census data on my laptop. Income levels, age demographics, foot traffic patterns around each Portland location. The numbers told the story the adults had missed. Two of the stores were indeed in expensive areas with low pedestrian flow, but the third, the one they'd written off as part of the same problem, was actually in a growing neighborhood. The issue wasn't location, it was timing. They'd opened 6 months before a major transit line construction project that had temporarily killed street parking. I cross-referenced the city planning documents I found online. Construction was scheduled to complete in 4 months. When it did, that location would have subway access and double foot traffic. I never said anything. Who would listen to a 16-year-old foster child's opinion about corporate strategy? But I kept the analysis in a folder on my computer, along with dozens of others. Every overheard conversation became a case study. Every financial report I glimpsed in Donald's study became a puzzle to solve. 6 months later, the Portland location they nearly closed became their highest-grossing Pacific Northwest store. I learned that night that being invisible had an advantage. People say things in front of you they'd never say to you. Alfred and Bella didn't care about the company. Alfred scrolled through his phone while Donald lectured about profit margins. Bella filed her nails while he spoke of international markets. But I sat invisible at the far end of the table, listening to every word. Resentment had simmered quietly. Why them, when they didn't care? Why not me, who cared too much? When Donald fell ill, I moved back to New York, renting a small apartment so I could visit him daily. At first, I told myself it was duty, compassion. But beneath that was something rawer, the hope that maybe, finally, he would see me. And now here I sat. Not with a token. Not with scraps. With everything. The empire. The legacy. The name. But not the family. Never the family. The screen flickered once, then steadied. Donald Mackintosh filled the frame, propped up against white hospital pillows. The sickness had stripped him of weight and color, leaving his cheeks hollow and his skin sallow. Tubes trailed out of sight, and a monitor beeped faintly in the background. But his eyes, sharp, cold, commanding, were untouched. Even dying, he looked like a man accustomed to power. His voice, though thinner than I'd ever heard it, carried into the conference room with unnerving clarity. If you are watching this, then I am gone. And the truth can finally be told. Across the table, Diana's back stiffened. Alfred shifted, finally looking up from his phone. Bella folded her arms, glaring at the screen as though it might blink first. Donald continued. 25 years ago, I was a young man fresh out of Howard University. That summer, before I left for Harvard Business School, I met a woman who changed me. Alicia Albany. She worked at a bookstore near campus, saving money for social work school. She was 18, beautiful, brilliant, fierce in her convictions. We spent 3 months together, the best 3 months of my life. My breath caught. The name twisted inside me. My mother. On the screen, a photograph appeared, a young Donald, broad-shouldered and smiling, his arm around a radiant girl with dark eyes and an open, hopeful grin. She looked so achingly familiar it was like looking into a mirror blurred by time. My mother. Donald's voice pressed on. When summer ended, I left for Harvard. A month later I was engaged to Diana Pemberton, a match arranged between our families. A suitable wife for the heir of Mackintosh Coffee. I left Alicia behind and never looked back. Diana's hand clenched against the table, her knuckles whitening. A year later, Alicia sent me a letter. She had given birth to a daughter. My daughter. She wasn't asking for money or acknowledgement. She simply wanted me to know Makosi existed. My lungs constricted. The room blurred around me. Donald's voice faltered for the first time, low with shame. I was 23, newly married, terrified of scandal. I sent Alicia money. I begged her never to contact me again. I chose my reputation over my responsibility. I turned my back on her. On you, Makosi. The air in the room shifted. Alfred stared, open-mouthed. Bella whispered something sharp under her breath. Diana sat motionless, but her eyes blazed with fury. Donald inhaled, his breath ragged. For 11 years I buried the truth. I built my empire. I played the role of husband and father. And then Alicia called me again. She was dying of lung cancer, though she never smoked a day in her life. She asked me for one thing: take care of Makosi when she was gone. Tell her the truth. Give her the family she deserved. A muscle in his jaw twitched. I agreed. But I was a coward. Diana suggested we take Makosi in as a foster child for the image. But Diana had her own reasons for wanting you close. She knew that someday, someone might ask questions. Might dig into the timeline. Having you visible, the grieving foster child we so generously rescued, was her insurance policy. If anyone ever suspected I had a daughter out there, they'd look at you and think, but she's just the charity case. You were hiding in plain sight, but not by accident. Diana made sure of it. She also knew that keeping you small, keeping you grateful, keeping you silent, that was her power over me. Every time I looked at you and said nothing, I became more complicit in her lie. She didn't just steal your childhood, Makosi. She stole my courage, piece by piece, year by year. The woman who could have exposed her deepest secret lived at her own table, and Diana made sure you never knew your worth. He paused, his breathing labored. She enjoyed it. The control. The irony. Having my only real child serve her fake ones. It wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. And I let her do it because I was too weak to break the silence that protected us both. A charity project, she said. A way to prove her generous heart. And I let her. I let you, Makosi, live under my roof as a stranger. My daughter, hidden in plain sight. Tears stung my eyes. For 13 years I had been treated as less than nothing. A prop at fundraisers. A servant at home. And all along, he had known. Donald's voice hardened. I thought my lies would stay buried. But Diana, you had your own secrets, didn't you? Diana flinched, her eyes narrowing into shards of ice. Donald coughed, a harsh, wet sound. When he spoke again, his words were slow but deliberate. 6 months ago, I was contacted by Astrid Lindquist, your closest friend, Diana. She had discovered your affair with her husband and decided to strike back. Out of spite, she told me the truth you had kept hidden for 20 years, that when we married, you were already pregnant. 6 weeks. The twins you claimed as mine were not my children at all. Their father was your professor. The room erupted. That's a lie. Diana shot to her feet, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. Donald's video carried on, indifferent to her outburst. I had DNA tests done. 3 separate labs. The results confirmed it. Alfred and Bella carry no Mackintosh blood. I am not their father. Bella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. No, that's not true. Alfred slammed a fist against the table, his face twisted in rage. You lied to us? He shouted at Diana. Our entire lives? You lied? Diana's lips parted, but no words came. For once, the master manipulator had no script. Donald's image flickered but his voice pushed through. Makosi is my blood. My only child. And I failed her. For 13 years, I watched her be treated as a prop in her own father's house. I said nothing. I let her suffer my cowardice, while children who were not mine bore my name. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Donald's breathing grew more labored, each word an effort. But even in my failure, Makosi, you proved yourself. You came to my bedside when I was sick. You read to me, you worked with me, you helped me keep this company alive when I no longer had the strength. You absorbed everything I had tried to teach the twins, everything they dismissed, everything they ignored. You listened. You understood. You cared. I could feel all 3 sets of eyes on me, burning holes into my skin, but I couldn't look up. My chest ached. Makosi, Donald said, softer now, you are my daughter. My heir. The true continuation of Isaiah Mackintosh's legacy. The company, the fortune, The name, it is yours. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. I cannot undo the years of silence. I cannot undo the pain. But I can leave you what was always meant to be yours. And I can beg, one last time, forgive me. The screen went black. The silence that followed Donald's confession lasted no longer than a breath. And then the room detonated. You lied to us? Alfred's voice cracked like a whip, low and trembling at first, then swelling with fury. His fist slammed down on the polished mahogany table, rattling the glasses of water. Our entire lives, you lied? Alfred, lower your voice, Diana snapped, though her tone was sharp without conviction. The authority that once rolled off her in waves was fraying. She sat ramrod straight, but the regal posture only highlighted the tremor in her hands where they gripped the chair. Bella turned to her, wide-eyed, her mascara beginning to smudge. Is it true? Her voice shook, thin as glass. Tell me it's not true. Tell me, Donald, she stumbled over the word, her throat closing around it. Tell me he was really our father. For once, Diana faltered. I had never seen her hesitate. Not in boardrooms, not at galas, not in private when she skewered me with her tongue. But now her lips trembled before sound emerged, her practice mask slipping. It was a mistake, she said at last, her words thin, brittle, breaking as they left her mouth. A moment of weakness. But he raised you. He loved you. Loved us. Bella's voice climbed higher, cracking like ice under strain. He left us nothing. She jabbed a manicured finger at me, as though my presence was an open wound. He left her everything. My body went rigid. I wanted to disappear, like I had trained myself to do for 13 long years in that house, to fold inward, shrink into silence, become invisible. But there was no hiding anymore. Donald had spoken my name on that screen, had dragged me into the light whether I wanted it or not. Alfred shoved his chair back so hard it toppled with a violent crash. We're not Mackintoshes. We're nobody. His eyes burned as he turned on Diana. And you knew it. You let us live a lie. I protected you. Diana's voice rose, shrill now, the iron splintering beneath it. She stood, her diamonds glittering harshly under the light, her whole frame quivering with indignation. You had privilege, opportunity, everything. I gave you the world. You gave us a fantasy, Alfred spat, his jaw clenched so hard the words almost broke his teeth. And now it's gone. What the hell are we supposed to do with this? Bella's breath hitched in panicked sobs, her hands clutching fistfuls of her designer dress. We don't even know who we are. Her voice cracked on the last word, the weight of it collapsing into the silence that followed. The scene spiraled. Voices rose, clashed, overlapped until it was just sound and fury, a storm trapped in that room. Alfred pacing like a caged animal. Bella collapsing into tears. Diana shouting over them both, her words jagged and wild. And me, sitting still, silent, caught in the eye of the storm. For years, I had been made to sit at their dinner table, excluded from conversation but never allowed to leave. I'd pushed food around my plate while they laughed, fought, and discussed futures that never included me. My presence tolerated, my absence forbidden. Now here I was again at the table, but for the first time, the entire conversation revolved around me. Every word, every accusation, every gasp of disbelief tethered to my name. The irony was cruel, and yet intoxicating. Harrison, the lawyer, finally broke the storm with a measured throat clear that sliced through the air like a gavel. That concludes the formal reading of the will, he said evenly, his voice somehow untouched by the chaos erupting around him. Ms. Mackintosh. The name struck me like a blow. Not Albany. Not charity case. Not foster child, Mackintosh. There are additional documents for you to review privately. A personal letter, and keys to several properties. And one more thing, Ms. Mackintosh, the board has called an emergency session. They expect you at headquarters in 48 hours to address the matter of leadership. Diana spun on him with fury renewed. This will is a fraud, she hissed. Her face had drained to a ghostly pale, yet her eyes blazed with venom. She manipulated him. She stole this. But Harrison's voice was implacable stone. The documents are valid. Contesting them will trigger the release of forensic reports commissioned by Mr. Mackintosh. Reports that detail embezzlement and fraud totaling over $10 million tied to your name, Mrs. Mackintosh, and over $3 million attributed to your children. The air in the room shifted like pressure dropping before a storm. Alfred froze mid-step. Bella's sobs faltered into silence. Diana's fury cracked into shock. Her lips parted, but no sound followed. For once in her life, Diana Mackintosh was speechless. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I could almost hear their world collapsing around them, the empire they believed was theirs reduced to rubble in a single morning. And me, holding the jagged crown none of us wanted, least of all me. I stood slowly, legs unsteady but spine straight. Harrison's words repeated in my head like a drum, Ms. Mackintosh. The lawyer slid a thick envelope toward me, Donald's handwriting unmistakable on its front. My name, my real name, written with deliberate care. Beside it, a set of keys, cool and metallic against the polished wood. I picked them up with trembling fingers. They clinked like chains and crowns all at once. Diana's eyes burned holes into me, her fury silent now but alive, seething. Alfred's face was a thundercloud of rage and betrayal. Bella crumpled in her chair, shoulders heaving with quiet sobs. And me? I had everything. And nothing. I left the conference room with the envelope and the keys heavy in my bag. Behind me, the family splintered further, accusations, sobs, silence. The perfect facade of the Mackintoshes shattered beyond repair. For 13 years, I had been invisible at their table. And now, I walked away as the only one who truly belonged to the name. Donald's letter still sat folded in my bag, the paper softened where my fingers had pressed it too hard in Central Park. I could feel the creases even now as I walked, ridges carved into the page, carved into me. It hadn't been a comfort. It hadn't even been an apology, not really. It was a confession, written in ink because the man had never managed to speak it aloud. He had called me daughter, yes, but only when it cost him nothing. He admitted his silence, yes, but only after 13 years of letting it stretch like a noose around my life. He called himself weak, but weakness doesn't explain watching cruelty bloom at your own table and pretending it isn't there. Weakness doesn't stretch for over a decade while your child is paraded as a lie. Donald wasn't weak. He was complicit. And Diana? Her betrayal was sharper, intentional. She had known from the beginning that I was blood. She had known Alfred and Bella were not. And still, she smiled for the cameras, placed me at her side like an accessory, and called it charity. She raised her own children as heirs, even as she knew they carried another man's blood. She let me wear the mask of orphanhood while she wore the mask of sainthood. This morning, the masks had cracked. The will reading had torn it all open. Donald, in his final act, had stripped them bare, Diana with nothing but baubles and vacation homes, the twins with scraps, and me, the invisible girl at the end of the table, declared heir to everything. And then came the letter, as if I should feel gratitude for a legacy he had only given me because the children he claimed weren't his after all. Guilt as inheritance. A coward's apology. Donald was gone. I had nowhere to place my fury at him. But Diana was still alive. Diana was still here. And I knew exactly where to find her. The hotel loomed ahead, its flag snapping in the wind. Outside, a banner unfurled over the doors, the Foster Children's Foundation annual luncheon, honoring Diana Mackintosh. The irony burned. Her coronation. Her sainthood sealed with applause. I pushed inside. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box. Chandeliers dripped with light, catching on crystal glasses and diamond bracelets. Waiters glided between tables, balancing trays of champagne. Pearls and tailored suits filled the room, voices rising in easy laughter. The air smelled of perfume layered over money. At the front, a scarlet banner framed the stage, Diana's name embroidered in gold thread. Rows of white draped tables pointed toward it like pews in a church. And there she was, waiting in the wings, Diana Mackintosh, in ivory silk that gleamed like armor, her diamonds scattering light across the room. She was radiant, poised, her smile the practiced kind that suggested both power and benevolence. The crowd leaned toward her as if she were a flame. People whispered, admired, applauded before the speech had even begun. She had built this empire of lies so carefully that no one could see the cracks until now. I walked down the aisle as the host mounted the podium. He tapped the microphone, his cue card trembling just slightly in his hand. And now, it is my honor to present an award for her tireless work, her unmatched generosity, her years of devotion to the city's most vulnerable, Mrs. Diana Mackintosh. Applause thundered. Diana glided toward the stage, every inch a queen approaching her crown. But I was already moving. I climbed the steps, heels striking against polished wood, the sound slicing through the applause. Gasps rippled across the room. The host faltered mid-sentence, his face blanching as I took the microphone from the stand. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't need it. This morning at the will reading of Donald Elijah Mackintosh, I began, my voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. DNA tests confirm that Alfred and Bella are not his children. They are Diana Mackintosh's illegitimate children, conceived before her marriage. Donald disinherited them all. The applause died in an instant. A champagne glass shattered against the floor. And he left everything to me, Makosi. The girl you've been told is Diana's foster daughter. I paused, watching the room fracture into chaos, phones rising, whispers igniting. But I was never a foster child. I am Donald's only daughter. His heir. And Diana knew it. The collective gasp rolled across the ballroom like thunder. Diana's face went white. The host stepped forward, reaching for the microphone, but I turned away from him. For years, she called me an orphan while raising her illegitimate children as royalty. My voice cut through the rising noise. This is the woman you came to honor. I set the microphone back on its stand and walked off the stage before security could reach me, leaving Diana frozen beneath the lights, the award still unclaimed in the host's trembling hands. I walked down the aisle, through the shocked hush, through the heavy doors, and into the sharp bite of New York air. Behind me, the ballroom buzzed like a hive struck with a stick, whispers, gasps, the low rumble of scandal spreading too fast to contain. But I didn't look back. For the first time, I had taken the truth Diana feared most and spoken it where everyone could hear. And her mask, her perfect, polished mask, had cracked under the weight of it. The luncheon had left me hollow. I had dropped the truth like a grenade into Diana's ballroom, and for a moment the shock had felt sweet. But outside, the applause I hadn't received echoed in my head, and Donald's letter weighed in my bag like a stone. Among the papers Harrison handed me after the will reading was a key. He had pressed it into my palm with a pause, as if he wasn't sure I'd want it. Your father wanted you to have this, he said. No explanation. Just the faintest flicker of sympathy in his lawyer's mask. I hadn't understood then. I barely understood now. But I walked anyway, because I couldn't go back to the penthouse, and my small apartment in the village felt too temporary to hold the rage that lived in my chest. My feet carried me north, to Lexington Avenue, where the family legacy still breathed in brick and mortar. The building stood like a relic and a beacon both, the original Mackintosh coffee, opened nearly a century ago by Isaiah Mackintosh, my great-great-grandfather. Isaiah had been born into slavery in the South. When freedom finally reached him, he carried nothing but determination north. In Harlem, he built something that lasted, a coffee house that was more than a store. It was a sanctuary, a meeting ground, a stage. Coffee in the front, survival in the back. Rumor had it Isaiah ran whiskey during Prohibition, not to get rich but to keep the doors open and the lights on. Isaiah had built more than a business. He had built a legacy. And now, all these decades later, I stood before it with a key in my hand. The cafe floor buzzed with quiet life. Laptops open, students bent over textbooks, friends leaning close over mugs of dark roast. The air was rich with the scent of coffee, the same smell that had wrapped around my childhood, seeping into every corner of the Mackintosh house. But the key wasn't for this. It was for the door at the back. A door marked private. My hand shook as I slid the key into the lock. The bolt clicked, heavy, deliberate. The staircase was narrow, steep. The hum of conversation faded behind me, replaced by the thrum of my own pulse. The basement smelled faintly of brick and history. The speakeasy had been quiet for decades, but everything about it felt alive: the velvet couches, the warm glow of the lamps, the portrait of Isaiah Mackintosh watching from the wall with eyes that had seen struggle, ambition, survival. The space hummed as though waiting for me. On the coffee table, next to the microphones and a glass pitcher of water, sat a bottle of red wine. My wine. The one I had always reached for in Washington, when a long night of studying blurred into dawn. Donald's spies must have told him. I stared at it, the glass dark as blood under the studio lights. It was only 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but after the morning I'd had, I really could use a drink. And what better place than this room, a basement built on secrets, waiting for confessions. I pulled the cork free and poured myself a glass. The first sip wasn't reckless. It was steady, deliberate, almost ritual. A way to claim the room. The taste lingered on my tongue, sharp and smooth, and something inside me loosened. Not enough to blur the edges. Just enough to lower the guard I had carried for 13 years. I set the glass down and reached for the letter attached to the main to one of the mics. I recognized the handwriting, Donald's. I started reading. Makozy. I always knew. And I did nothing. I watched you suffer under Diana's cruelty and let you remain invisible in my own house. That truth will never leave me. I cannot undo it. All I can do is leave you, in writing, what should have been yours from the start: the estate, the company, the truth. Claim it. I did not have the courage to do so in life. Do it now. I know words are small here. I gave you silence when I owed you acknowledgement, distance when I owed you love. In my final months I watched you. You visited because you cared, not because you sought reward. You sat with me when no one else would. I finally saw what I had refused to see. You listen. You absorb. You understand people, not just numbers. You understand stories. I learned, belatedly, that you once recorded a tiny college podcast about coffee and studying. I had someone find it. Even then you spoke as if words mattered, even when almost no one listened. You believed in telling stories. You believed they could heal. Your mother believed that too. Alicia thought stories could repair what silence had broken. I failed both of you by staying silent. This is my attempt, too late though it is, to honor her wish. I am leaving you the studio. Not as a corporate asset. Not as a boardroom concession. This room is yours, to say what needed saying, to give voice to those who have been buried by silence. If you want it. If you can bear it. Donald. My throat tightened as I lowered the letter. For years, I had begged for a word from him, any word. Now I had too many, delivered when it no longer mattered. I wanted to tear the note to shreds. To scream at the brick walls, you had 13 years to call me your daughter, and instead you give me a microphone in a basement. So instead I reached for the wine and then the microphone. I pressed the button. A red light flickered on, steady and sharp. My reflection blinked back at me from the dark glass of the espresso machine. And then I spoke. My name is Makozy, I said, my own voice curling back through the headphones, low and undeniable. And I have been silent long enough. The sentence startled me. I hadn't written it down. It rose on its own, uninvited but certain, like steam escaping a kettle, too hot to be held back. I grew up in the Mackintosh penthouse, a place of marble floors and polished silver, where every surface reflected wealth but never warmth. I wasn't family. I was the artifact in their carefully curated collection. The orphan. The charity case. The girl Diana Mackintosh displayed at galas when she needed to perform compassion for an audience. See how generous we are, her practiced smile announced, while her eyes ensured I understood my place: decorative, temporary, disposable. The wine slid down my throat, sharp as truth. I existed in their periphery. Present at the dining table because absence would have looked cruel, but excluded from every conversation that mattered. The twins, Alfred and Bella, spoke as though I were invisible, their laughter designed to drown out any sound I might make. Diana's glances carried the weight of erasure, her silence more cutting than any words. But invisibility taught me something they never anticipated. I learned to watch. To listen. To absorb. 13 years of boardroom strategy disguised as dinner conversation. 13 years of corporate maneuvers discussed over dessert. They thought I was furniture. I became an archive. I paused, let the weight of that sink in. I studied business because I wanted to prove I was more than their good deed. I studied media because I knew stories were power, and I refused to remain a footnote in theirs. I worked retail shifts at Mackintosh coffee locations while writing graduate-level case studies analyzing Mackintosh Coffee's market strategy. I earned my MBA believing, foolishly, desperately, that competence could earn me what I thought blood had denied me. Not as heir. I knew better than to dream that large. But perhaps as someone valued. Someone seen. Someone who belonged. My reflection caught in the gloss surface of the equipment, a woman misnamed, misplaced, mistaken for nothing, now claiming everything. Then came the will reading. My voice sharpened, precise as a blade. I walked into that conference room expecting a token gesture. A piece of jewelry, perhaps. Some small acknowledgement of the years I'd spent as living proof of Diana's charitable heart. Instead, I walked out with $2.8 billion. Complete ownership of Mackintosh Coffee. And the truth that detonated everything I thought I knew: I wasn't the foster child. I was Donald Mackintosh's daughter. His blood. His heir. The only legitimate Mackintosh in that room. I set the glass down with deliberate control. But vindication doesn't feel the way you imagine it will. Not pride. Not belonging, betrayal. Because Donald knew. For 13 years, he knew exactly who I was. And he chose, actively, deliberately chose, to let me believe I was an orphan with no connection to him. He let me suffer under Diana's psychological cruelty while knowing I was his own flesh and blood. He allowed me to be treated as a charity case in what was rightfully my home. He watched me call myself a foster child when I was his daughter. And only when the children he claimed as his own were proven not to be his did he suddenly acknowledge what I'd been all along. That wasn't love. That wasn't redemption. That was cowardice dressed in estate planning. The microphone captured the measured breath I took, steadying myself. Silence, I said, leaning closer, my voice steady, fierce. Silence is poison. It convinces you to stay small. To swallow your hunger. To accept scraps when you deserve a seat. Silence doesn't protect you, it protects the people who hurt you. It lets them live tidy lives while you bleed in the margins. I closed my eyes. The headphones filled with my own breath, heavy, alive. They told me I was fragile. But I was never glass. I was a match. All I needed was air. The words burned hotter than the wine. My name is Makosi, I repeated, each syllable sharpening. And this is Karma Café, where we serve truth hot and revenge cold. The morning after, New York carried on as though nothing had changed. Cabs honked. Vendors shouted. The September sky still wore its indifferent blue. But in the palm of my hand, the world had cracked open. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Notifications stacked so thick across the lock screen it glowed like a lantern. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Even strangers on WhatsApp, names I didn't know, voices I'd never heard. Some messages were quick bursts, almost frantic, like people who had been holding their breath for years and finally exhaled. Is this real? Finally someone said it out loud. My mother did this to me. Thank you. You spoke my life back to me. I didn't know how much I needed to hear this until now. Others spilled into paragraphs. A foster child turned grown man describing the years he felt erased, moved from house to house like borrowed furniture, learning to pack his whole world into one duffel bag. A woman disinherited for marrying against her family's wishes, writing that lawyers could take her father's house but not her dignity. They came from everywhere, women and men, teenagers and grandparents, names attached and names withheld. Strangers pouring their pain into my inbox because I had cracked open mine. The phrase Karma Café had been a drunken throwaway the night before. Now it was a rallying cry, trending worldwide. Hashtags multiplied like sparks on dry kindling. Hashtag Karma Café, hashtag Invisible No More, hashtag Makosi Speaks. I left my apartment late that morning, restless under the constant vibration of my phone. The city roared the same as always, but this time I heard my name in it. At the bodega on the corner, a tiny television flickered above the counter. The morning show host leaned forward in his chair, his tone caught between admiration and scandal. "This is extraordinary," he said as a slideshow of images filled the screen. A grainy college photo of me at Howard, an unflattering gala shot from Diana's charity circuit, a press photo of a Mackintosh coffee storefront. Then my voice, lifted from the podcast, poured through the tinny speakers. "Silence doesn't protect you, it protects the people who hurt you." The cashier noticed me watching and did a double take. Recognition flickered across his face. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His silence felt almost like respect. I paid for a bottle of water and left, his eyes following me out the door. 2 blocks later, I passed a coffee shop humming with conversation. Students hunched over laptops, earbuds in, but near the counter a group had gathered around a phone propped between their cups. My voice carried out into the room. "You are not fragile glass. You are a match." One girl whispered, "That line?" That line lit me up. The boy with her nodded fiercely, as if they'd both been waiting their whole lives for someone to give them permission to exist louder. I paused outside, watching strangers debate my life as though it belonged to them. Maybe now it did. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop, hoping a bigger screen would make the flood less overwhelming. It didn't. Hundreds of messages piled in every few minutes, collapsing into one endless stream. Some were raw confessions typed in shaky sentences. "I can't tell my family. But I can tell you. If there's a way to share, I'm ready. Tell me where." I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm not. Others were longer, considered. A retired teacher in Chicago who said she'd been written out of her sister's will after a lifetime of caretaking. A teenager in Lagos who sent a voice note, his English accented but clear, saying my words about silence had given him the courage to tell his father he wouldn't join the family business. A grandmother in Queens who had lived as a family ghost for 70 years, never spoken of by her siblings, now writing that she was ready to reclaim her name. And it wasn't just confessions. Reporters circled like vultures. Producers dangled airtime. Even brands slithered into the inbox, eager to slap their logo on my fire as if courage could be commodified. I ignored them all. But the others, the ones trembling, raging, breaking open, those I couldn't ignore. It hadn't been a plan. But maybe it was becoming one. By mid-afternoon, Karma Café wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. Podcasters dissected my words like scripture. One panel argued whether my revenge was brave or selfish. A conservative commentator called me a danger to family values. A progressive journalist called me the voice of a new generation. Clips of my voice, subtitled into Spanish, French, Korean, spread across feeds like wildfire. Someone printed "Silence is Poison" on a t-shirt overnight and sold out by noon. Even my LinkedIn, a platform I'd barely touched, swelled with connection requests. Executives who wouldn't have given me a summer internship 6 months ago were suddenly lining up to congratulate me on my courageous leadership. The irony made me want to laugh, or scream, or both. By evening, the glow of my screen blurred into haze, not from brightness but from weight. Angus pressed against my thigh, his warm body anchoring me to something steady. His stump tail twitched with every buzz, every ding, every digital gasp from the world outside. "You see this, boy?" I murmured, stroking the curve of his head. "Looks like we started something." He licked my hand once, solemn as ever. Something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. The family's response came fast. Bella went first, mascara streaked across her face in a shaky Instagram video. "She's lying," Bella sobbed. "Dad loved us. He wasn't perfect, but who is? She's making us sound like villains just to get attention." The comments cut sharper than I ever could. "You spent your life on yachts and still want sympathy? Makosi worked her way through college while you blew through trust funds. Sit down, Bella." Then Alfred, drunk on livestream, voice raw with rage. "She stole our inheritance. She stole everything. Dad didn't even know what he was signing. She tricked him. She." The words blurred into slur. The comments mocked him until he ended the feed in silence. And Diana didn't cry. She released a statement through a glossy PR firm, venom pressed into velvet. It pains me to see a young woman so clearly manipulated, so determined to destroy her father's memory. Donald would be horrified. I can only pray for her. Prayers from Diana were daggers wrapped in silk. I read them all in the quiet of my apartment. Angus curled close. For a moment, the weight of it pressed down, fury, accusations, sheer noise. Then I remembered the red light glowing in Isaiah's old speakeasy, and the words I had spoken there. Silence is poison. I poured a glass of water instead of wine and whispered, "Let them scream. The truth is louder." By late afternoon, an email from the Mackintosh coffee board arrived, polite font, surgical tone. The emergency meeting already scheduled for tomorrow would proceed as planned: the will, the transition, the empire. One new line had been added like a blade slipped under paper: "Your podcast will also be on the agenda." I could see Mitchell Barnes's tight smile behind the words. They weren't just questioning my inheritance anymore. They were questioning my voice. That was when Celeste appeared, recommended by a friend of Maria's, a calm voice in the middle of noise. She wasn't family, wasn't bored, wasn't press. She was just steady. A former paralegal with a gift for cutting through chaos, she had already filtered my inbox down from thousands to dozens in a matter of hours. "Most of these can wait," she said, her tone even, sliding a neat folder across my kitchen table. "But there are a few you'll want to read now, 3 from foster organizations, 2 from former suppliers, and 1 from a woman who says she knew your mother." Angus sniffed at her ankle, decided she passed inspection, and curled back against my leg. I looked at her, at the clarity she carried into the room, and felt something loosen in my chest. The world had cracked open, but maybe I didn't have to hold it together alone. "Thank you," I said, my voice lower than I meant. Celeste just nodded. "You've got a board meeting tomorrow," she reminded me. "I'll make sure you're ready. Everything else can wait." For the first time all day, I believed her. That night, I returned to Harlem. The old speakeasy smelled faintly of dust and destiny. I sat where Isaiah once poured contraband whiskey to keep the lights on, where Donald had left me a room instead of words, and where I had finally spoken mine. The walls held the hush of secrets. Angus curled at my feet, stump tail flicking. I adjusted the mic, pressed the button, and let the red light bloom. "This is Makozy," I said softly, steady now, sharpened by the storm outside. And apparently, the world was listening. The elevator hummed like a throat clearing itself. 40 floors up, the city had the color of steel and late morning. I could see the smear of Central Park from the glass lobby, a green lung exhaling into towers. My name was on the visitor screen, but I didn't need a badge anymore. I owned the building that bought the screen. Angus wasn't with me. Dogs don't belong in rituals of power. I smoothed my jacket, pressed my palm once to my sternum to remind my heart it had a cage, and pushed open the glass door. The boardroom was a rectangle of intimidation: a mile-long table, 12 leather chairs, a wall of glass that made you feel on display even when the blinds were down. The air smelled like citrus cleaner and old decisions. People looked up when I entered, some with curiosity, some with calculation, a few with the careful blankness that passes for respect in rooms like this. Mitchell Barnes, CFO, sat nearest the head of the table, a stack of printouts fanned in front of him like a deck of cards he'd already decided how to play. Patricia Wong, head of international development, had a legal pad and 3 pens lined up perfectly parallel. Harrison Clark, the former rival CEO, watched the door like he'd been timing my arrival. And Thomas Harrison, the oldest member, sat at the far end with his hands folded, eyes bright in a face lined like good paper. "Ms. Mackintosh," Barnes said, not rising. "We appreciate your punctuality." I took the seat at the head of the table. No one told me to move. "It's Makozy," I said evenly. "Thank you all for making time." Barnes cleared his throat. "We'll begin with the agenda circulated last night. Item 1, transition of controlling shares. Item 2, interim leadership. Item 3, brand risk, investor sentiment, and," he glanced down, a small muscle twitching near his jaw, "your podcast." The word sat on the lacquer like a spill. Before we start, Patricia said, her tone cool but not unkind, I want to acknowledge that yesterday was unprecedented. Emotions are running high. Our job is to steady the ship. I felt the old instinct rise in me. Make yourself smaller, apologize for the space you take. I let it rise and pass. Good, I said. Let's steady it. Barnes steepled his fingers. First, to the matter of equity. Legal has confirmed transfer of majority shares to you, pursuant to the will. There are no procedural obstacles to acknowledge. The way he said it made it sound like a disappointment he prepared himself to endure. That gives you the votes to confirm interim leadership. Confirm? I said softly. Or select. He didn't blink. Traditionally, the board advises. Prudence suggests we maintain continuity. An external interim CEO with significant retail and supply chain experience would reassure investors. In time, we could revisit. He meant, step aside, learn in the shadows, if you're lucky we'll let you carry water. I ran a finger once along the table's edge, feeling the seam where two slabs met. Continuity, I said, letting the word lift into the room, is a beautiful idea when the machine is well oiled. Was it, these last months? Barnes bristled. Donald's illness created lag. We managed. Did you? I opened the laptop I'd brought and turned the screen toward them. Let's talk lag. The Singapore expansion proposal delivered 3 months ago, the one that secured government incentives and cut first-year capex by 9%. It went out under Donald's name. I tapped the metadata page. Authored here. Revision history here. Logged in from Donald's office between 10:12 p.m. and 2:43 a.m. for 3 consecutive nights. I met Barnes's eyes. Those keystrokes were mine. A quiet move through the room. Patricia's pen stilled. Clark leaned forward, interest licking at the corners of his mouth. The emergency renegotiation during the Colombian weather shock, I continued. 15 million saved by splitting shipments between the Magdalena and Atrato corridors and adding conditional premiums for farmers who couldn't hit quantity but kept quality. Signed Donald. Drafted by me. I slid a second screen, supplier email threads, timestamps nobody but the person who wrote them would know to collect. Donald read every word. His voice was too weak to call, mine wasn't. Patricia's expression changed, relief and recognition mingling. I knew something had shifted, she said quietly. The memos became precise. Clark interlaced his fingers. Digital transformation, packaging pivot, the attrition drop, he ticked them off like items on a scavenger list. Was that you as well? Yes. No apology. No performance. Just the truth on the table. Barnes sat back. Even if you consulted. I didn't consult, I said, gentler than the line deserved. I executed. Because the company needed it, and no one else was doing it in time. Silence. You could hear the city trying to shout through the glass and failing. All right, Barnes said, paper dry. Assuming we accept your contribution, we still have the problem of public perception. The will reading has become spectacle. Your recording escalated that spectacle. Investor Relations reports a spike in concern. We cannot have our brand entangled with personal vendettas. Personal truth, I corrected. And our brand was born entangled with it. I gestured toward the photograph on the far wall, Isaiah outside the first shop on Lexington, sleeves rolled, jaw set against a century that didn't want him to exist. This company started as a room where people gathered to be seen. When Prohibition cut margins, Isaiah kept the lights on with the speakeasy downstairs. People told their truths in whispers. The whisper became a wall of coffee houses. Your deck calls them third places. Isaiah called them refuge. Thomas Harrison's eyes warmed. He did, he murmured, memory carrying him somewhere the rest of us couldn't go. The recording, Patricia said carefully, was powerful. It was also raw. We'd like to know your intention. My intention, I said, and I felt the steel in it, is to run this company with the values that built it and the numbers that sustain it. And to stop pretending that truth and commerce are enemies. They aren't. They only become enemies when you lie. Karma Café isn't scandal for scandal's sake. It's a room, ours, where people finally get to speak. Barnes opened his hands, mock reasonable. And when the speaking hurts the brand? The brand is coffee and courage. I let the words find their weight. Yesterday's episode wasn't branded content. It was confession. If you want a statement for the market, here it is. We won't exploit pain. We also won't smother it to keep hands clean. We'll build guardrails. No ongoing litigation. No names without consent. No blind items. People tell their stories, or they don't. But we won't turn off the mic because someone with a title is uncomfortable. Clark's mouth twitched. Guardrails. Investor relations will like that. Investor relations will like numbers, I said, tapping to a fresh slide. Day 0 indicators, site traffic up 31%, loyalty app opens up 23, DMs to corporate accounts quadrupled. I'm not counting them as gospel. It's noise. But it's directional noise. The story people are telling themselves isn't boycott. It's belong. Barnes's pen clicked twice. Anecdotes. We need quarters. Then let's get to quarters, I said, pivoting the screen to my 5-year plan. You wanted continuity. Here's continuity that moves. We accelerate Southeast Asia with a hub in Ho Chi Minh City. We stop bleeding in certain European metros by closing prestige boxes that never paid rent with anything but ego. We take the farmer-first premium model we piloted in Wheeler and scale it with third-party verification, paying more at origin while cutting volatility exposure with better forward contracts. Stateside, we refit 10 flagship stores as true gathering spaces, small stages, rentable rooms, local art, starting with Lexington. The rest get a lighter touch, more seats, fewer mirrors. Patricia smiled despite herself. Fewer mirrors. People don't come to look at walls, I said. They come to look at each other. Thomas Harrison gave a laugh that sounded like a door opening. Isaiah would have liked that. Barnes rubbed the bridge of his nose. You're young, he said, as if it were an accusation. You're untested. I'm educated, I answered, the heat even but bright. Business degree, MBA. Supply chain experience you've already tried to deny me. And I've been listening for 13 years. Every dinner, every son, pay attention speech that went to the wrong ears and still landed in mine. You mistook invisibility for ignorance. That's on you, not me. He flinched, almost imperceptibly. Patricia looked down to hide a smile. We're not here to fight you, Clark said. We're here to see if you can carry what you claim. On the balance sheet and in public. I can, I said. But make no mistake, I will not barter my voice to make your quarterly letter read cleaner. The recording stands. The show continues on our terms with those guardrails. And there will be no gag order tucked into an NDA. If that's a condition, say it now so I can decline in plain English. The air sharpened. Somewhere below us, a siren drew a red line through the city and faded. Patricia set her pen down, her gaze steady. I don't want you silent, she said. I want you strategic. If we're doing this, I need discipline. Releases coordinated. Crisis plans ready. You don't ambush your own company again, fair. It landed like respect, not control. I agree, I said. No surprises. You'll have calendars, summaries, veto power where legal risk lives. But you don't get to veto truth because it's inconvenient. Barnes exhaled through his nose. We're down to votes then. He looked at the others, taking the temperature like a man checking a roast. Interim CEO, pending formal search. Guardrails as discussed. Communications oversight. We revisit in 6 months. I held his gaze. No interim. You can review performance anytime you like. But if I'm carrying this, I'm carrying it with my name. He hesitated. Power on paper or power in practice was the question we both walked into. He glanced to Patricia. She didn't move. He glanced to Clark. Clark's eyes were amused, interested, not hostile. He glanced down the table to Thomas Harrison, who hadn't spoken for several minutes and didn't look like he planned to. Fine, Barnes said. The words sounded smooth and still rough. We'll put it to a vote. He called names. Hands rose. One by one, cautious palms turned into open affirmation. Patricia's hand came up first. Clark's a beat later. Two more, then another. Barnes lifted his last, not wanting to find himself on the wrong side of the future. All in favor of confirming, he swallowed the adjective confirming Mackintosh as Chief Executive Officer. 12, Thomas Harrison said, counting softly like a blessing. Then he looked at me. Welcome to the job. I nodded once, not trusting my voice to carry the moment without cracking. The room didn't erupt. This wasn't a place for eruptions. But the air changed temperature, just enough to register on skin. Barnes shuffled his papers as if he could stack his way back into control. Next item, the podcast. Guardrails to be formalized by legal and PR by close of business. No references to ongoing cases or identifiable individuals without consent. No claims that could be construed as defamatory. Sponsorship, if any, routed through the company by agreed. Patricia's approval was quiet but unmistakable. Clark scribbled something I couldn't see and nodded to himself. Barnes didn't argue. Anything else? I asked. Clark raised a hand slightly. Yes, he said. Two things. First, you will need a chief of staff who isn't afraid of you. Find one fast. Second, his mouth softened. When you tell stories, don't forget to tell ours. The people here, he gestured around the table, past the table, into the floors below. They carried this brand through good and bad leadership. If Karma Café is going to claim the soul of the company, make sure the company recognizes itself. I let the note land. I will. Thomas Harrison unfolded his hands at last. And one thing from me, he said. When I started here, your great-great-grandfather's photograph hung in the lobby. People touched the frame for luck on their way in. It was replaced, sometime between then and now, with a stock image of a latte heart. His smile was rueful. Put Isaiah back. Done, I said, and didn't wait for a committee. Patricia gathered her pens. Then we have a path, she said, as much to the room as to herself. We steady the ship by letting it move. Barnes closed his folder. We'll release a statement, he said, almost gracious. Succession secure. Strategic continuity. New investment in community initiatives. No reference to viral content. I'll release one too, I said, standing. It will say what's true, that Mackintosh Coffee is returning to what Isaiah built, places where people are seen, served, and safe. I pushed my chair in, the sound clean, decisive. And that the girl at the end of the table is done being quiet. No one tried to stop me when I turned toward the glass. Central Park threw a sliver of green into the room. The city churned, indifferent and holy. For a heartbeat, I saw the basement on Lexington overlaid on this tower, the old bar under my palms, the red light, the weight of a microphone that had felt heavier than gold. Behind me, papers rustled, voices lowered, the machine beginning to turn in the direction I'd named. Ahead of me, the reflection in the window steadied, a woman who had been a prop in other people's virtue now carrying a company with both hands. I rested my fingertips against the cool glass, as if to sign something visible only from the outside. When I left the room, Thomas Harrison's voice followed, warm as a hand on a shoulder. Welcome to the light, Ms. Mackintosh. Thank you, I said, not turning, because some things are truer when you face forward. It's bright in here. The elevator doors closed. Somewhere far below, a basement waited, and inside it a red lamp that meant speak. I used to imagine that if the Mackintoshes ever fell, it would be sudden. A single clean break. A headline, a scandal, a crash so sharp it cut through the marble walls they built around themselves. But I was wrong. Their downfall wasn't an explosion. It was erosion, 3 separate implosions, slow and ugly, each one exposing what had been hollow all along. Alfred went first. Alfred had always believed in noise as power. He was the loud laugh at a party, the handshake that crushed, the man who mistook volume for authority. At the will reading, when Donald's letter revealed the truth, Alfred roared like a wounded animal. But the roar had nowhere to go. In the days after my podcast went viral, the roar became constant. He live-streamed drunk from his penthouse, slurring accusations. He called me a fraud, a thief, a trickster who had manipulated a dying man. His followers didn't rally to him, they circled him like spectators at a crash site. Clips spread, Alfred with a glass in hand, shouting, "She stole our name. She stole our blood." Each time he said it, the comments cut deeper. "She didn't steal it, Alfred. She is it." The more he shouted, the smaller he became. His temper drove away the investors who had once humored him, hoping proximity to his name might mean influence. His friends, parasites in designer suits, slipped away. The laugh that had once filled rooms began to echo back at him alone. His collapse was not cinematic. It was pathetic. A man so used to being heard that when the world stopped listening, he didn't know how to breathe. The last I heard, he'd left for a villa in Italy, trying to outrun his own echo. But the internet never forgets. His collapse is archived in high definition, a cautionary tale of what happens when the only thing you know how to wield is noise. Bella's unraveling was quieter, but no less brutal. If Alfred burned out loud, Bella withered in silence disguised as glamour. She had been Diana's perfect creation, polished, poised, every angle refined for the camera. She didn't just attend parties, she was the party, the sparkle others orbited. At first, she doubled down. Instagram feeds of champagne flutes, couture gowns, hashtags like hashtag unbothered and hashtag real Mackintosh. But the audience she depended on turned cruel. People mocked the captions, the curated poses. "Unbothered?" They wrote. "Looks pretty bothered to me." The comments weren't applause anymore. They were knives. Then came the invitations, or rather, the absence of them. The same society pages that had once chronicled her every movement stopped printing her name. Friends stopped calling. The spotlight dimmed until it vanished, leaving her on stage with no audience, clutching a script no one wanted to hear. I heard whispers, closets filled with designer bags still tagged, bought in a frenzy to fill the silence. She tried to shop her way back into relevance, but relevance doesn't live on hangers. Her last post was a photo of Central Park in autumn, captioned, "Things change." Comments flooded with pity disguised as kindness. "Stay strong. You'll find your way." But the truth was simple. Bella had been raised as a reflection, not a person. And when the mirror cracked, she couldn't see herself at all. And then there was Diana. Diana was different. Diana was the architect. She had curated her life like a gallery exhibit of control. Every gala, every quote to the press, every diamond a calculated placement. For years, she was the patron saint of appearances, the queen of ice. When my podcast aired, she didn't rage. She didn't sob. She released a statement through a PR firm, her venom wrapped in velvet. "It pains me to see a young woman manipulated." Donald would be horrified. I pray for her. Prayers from Diana were daggers in disguise. But the public didn't buy it. Not this time. The world was tired of polished lies. The same cameras that once adored her now lingered too long, catching her mid-scowl, mid-stumble. Every interview clipped shorter, every appearance sharpened to cruelty. Whispers grew, of dinners cancelled, of glasses shattered against walls, of tantrums behind doors that once only opened to elegance. Diana had ruled by spectacle. Now she lived in invisibility. For her, that was the cruelest punishment. A woman who once walked into rooms expecting them to rearrange around her now found herself standing alone in empty halls. I watched them fall, one by one. Alfred, undone by his own noise. Bella, exiled from the eyes she had lived for. Diana, dethroned by the truth she had tried to bury. And yes, I felt satisfaction. 13 years of humiliation, of exclusion, of being invisible at their table, there was a justice in watching their glass walls crack. But I also felt something I didn't expect, pity. Pity for Alfred, who had never been taught how to be anything but loud. For Bella, who never learned she was more than decoration. For Diana, who built herself into a fortress so rigid it collapsed the moment truth seeped through the walls. They had lived behind glass. And now the cracks were visible to everyone. One night, months later, I found myself outside Diana's building. Her penthouse windows glowed faintly, curtains half drawn. For a moment, I imagined her standing there, staring out at the city she no longer ruled. I thought about going up, knocking, demanding answers she would never give. But I didn't. Because I already had my answer. The Mackintoshes hadn't fallen because of me. They had fallen because of silence. They had built their house on it, brick by careful brick. And when I broke mine, their foundation gave way. I went home that night. Angus was waiting, stump tail flicking like a metronome of loyalty. He followed me into the apartment, into the quiet, into the future. I poured tea, sat at my desk, and looked at the microphone waiting in its stand. The Mackintoshes were finished. But my story wasn't. And neither were the voices waiting to be heard. 6 months can feel like a lifetime. Mackintosh Coffee is no longer the company I once circled like a ghost, peering in through windows where I was never welcome. The hum inside the stores has changed. They feel warmer now, less polished marble, more wood and light. Spaces where you can linger without a credit card burning in your pocket. Where conversation flows as easily as the coffee. The changes aren't cosmetic. They're structural. Baristas have benefits. Farmers earn enough to send their children to school. It isn't charity, it's correction. For the first time in decades, the numbers balance with integrity. The board no longer underestimates me. In those first weeks, they watched me like babysitters keeping a toddler away from matches, waiting for me to ignite the wrong fire. But quarter by quarter, their skepticism softened. Barnes admitted, grudgingly, that the Singapore expansion I had pushed through was outperforming his projections. Patricia told me she hadn't felt this hopeful about Mackintosh Coffee in years. Skepticism is a short-lived creature when faced with undeniable results. And the family? Silence. Alfred vanished into exile, posting drunken fragments from Europe until the comments turned cruel and he stopped posting at all. Bella slipped into shadows, tasting what it was like to live without an audience. And Diana, with no galas, no glittering photos, no carefully scripted statements, withered. For a woman who built herself on appearances, invisibility became the sharpest punishment. And me? I worked. I learned how to sit at the head of the table and let decisions rest on my shoulders without breaking me. I learned how to carry an empire with one hand and a microphone with the other. And I learned to wait. Because Karma Café was never meant to be only my story. My match had already lit the fire. The question was, whose story would I tell first? Tonight, I got my answer. The basement still carries the scent of its first life. Isaiah's speakeasy is long gone, but the wood remembers. Now it's my studio, soft lights that make every word feel larger than life, the old counter polished until it gleams. In the corner, the espresso machine hisses, filling the room with the sharp perfume of fresh roast. A jug of water in a glass waits on the table, a quiet ritual. Angus curls at my feet, stump tail twitching like he knows this night matters more than most. I've done my research. I know who Linda Harris is. I know the shape of her betrayal. I know what she lost, and how she clawed it back with hands the world underestimated. Her words sit before me now, pages of testimony. Everything she wanted the world to know but thought no one would care to hear. That's why I created this space. Every episode, I read their stories and tell you exactly how they turned their breaking point into their breakthrough. How they took their pain and forged it into power. I rise and cross to the espresso machine, cappuccino. Extra foam. Linda told me that's what she used to make for herself at the office, late at night, when she was the only one left working. It feels right to honor that tonight. Steam rises, milk froths, and soon the air sharpens with warmth. I carry the cup back to my seat, settling in front of the microphone. Angus shifts, his warmth against my ankle grounding me. I glance at the pages now on my tablet, Linda's words, her truth. 62 years old. Newark, New Jersey. 16 years of watching her boss steal her work. And the day she bought his company out from under him. Then I press record. The studio was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive, as if it's holding its breath for a secret. I sat at the mic, fingertips brushing the worn edge of the old table. Angus shifted at my feet, his stump tail flicking once, twice, as though even he knew something important was about to happen. I drew in a breath, deep, steady. The red light blinked on. I leaned forward. My voice filled the headphones, low and certain. My name is Mackintosh. And this is Karma Café. Here's the story. A secretary spends 16 years building her boss's empire. He steals her work, takes all the credit, and assumes she'll stay quiet forever. But silence doesn't last. And just like that, Karma Café opens its doors for someone else's story.
Thank you for watching. Subscribing is free, so don't miss what's coming next. Hit like if betrayal has ever touched your life. Subscribe if you've tasted revenge, or wished you had. Because every episode, someone new takes this seat, and their truth might be the one you've been waiting to hear. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And don't forget to tell us where in the world you're listening from. Let's stay connected.